The human brain is the most complex biological organ in the known universe. If every person on planet Earth held a walnut in their hand like this one, it would take 10 planet Earths full of people, each holding a walnut, to make 80 billion. That's the number of neurons in our brains. And these 80 billion neurons work in concert through 100 trillion connections to produce thoughts, desires, love, music, mathematics, and art. And like the flavor chambers that are held within the folds and grooves of a walnut surface, the human brain is equally convoluted, folded and rippled with unctuous goodness in the form of intelligence. Either way, that's a lot of human brain power. And that immense power is due not only to the brain's massive size, but also to the way in which it's configured, like a self-connected supercomputer. Relative to our body size, the human brain is more than 10 times larger than that of other animals like lions and horses or elephants and whales, and over 5 times larger than those of our family friends like cats and dogs. I'm sorry, Frida, that's just the way it is.
Even our closest cousins, the great apes, pale by comparison, with brains that are only 1/3 the size of ours, relative to their body weight. Perhaps surprisingly, on the grand scale of things, this highly developed brain, the biological feature that makes us so unique amongst animals, is a relatively recent development. During the evolutionary history of humans and our hominin ancestors, brain size was one of the last major changes to occur in our bodies, but it would have the largest impact on our ecologies, behaviors, and success as a species. It was around 7 million years ago that our anthropoid lineage broke off from the one that would lead to chimpanzees, who are now our closest living relatives. This branching was triggered by a drying of the African continent that created many open savanna spaces between the remaining patches of dense forest where they had previously lived. In this new, open, sunnier, and hotter environment, early hominins began walking upright on 2 feet as a more efficient way of getting around, and thus left our knuckle-walking primate cousins behind as we embarked on our new bipedal evolutionary journey. This new form of locomotion had many consequences, including changes to our bodies and brains. It also freed up our hands, allowing them to carry objects and make and manipulate tools with great dexterity, and eventually carry out such important tasks as adding likes or swiping right or left. Though humans split from the rest of the great apes around 7 million years ago, we did not experience a dramatic change in brain size or computational power for the next 5 million years as we transitioned from apes to our ape-like bipedal ancestors, the Australopithecines, to humans. At some point during that process, we went from being upright apes to crossing a threshold and becoming something more human. And most people who study this would say it had something to do with growing a bigger brain. By 3 million years ago, Australopithecines were abundant in the savanna and forest scrubs of East Africa. They walked around upright, but also remained good climbers of trees as they scavenged for fruits, nuts, seeds, and insects to feed upon. But something happened around 2 million years ago that would lead to the first humans, a species known as Homo habilis, or handyman, which would involve a conjunction of new dietary inputs, social cooperation, and the ability to create their own stone tools. The consequence of these ecological changes for the first humans would be the start of a rapid increase in brain size and abilities. Whereas many animals, from crows to chimps, are able to use tools to solve problems and access otherwise hidden food resources, only one animal is known to create their own tools from scratch and to use that technology to master their environment: us. By chipping flakes and chunks off stones and rocks, handyman Homo habilis was able to make chopping axes and slicing knives that could pierce the tough skin of large megafauna like mastodons and saber-toothed cats. From that point onwards, humans adopted a new diet that was rich in energy and nutrients. They consumed vast quantities of meat scavenged from dead animals that they encountered in their nomadic wanderings across the African plains. Packs of early humans, running long distances, were likely expert scavengers of carrion or poachers of other predators' prey, since they lacked the abilities to bring down large mammals on their own, at least for the moment. The role of meat eating in this story on brain evolution is hard to overstate. You see, we could never have grown such large brains on a paltry vegetarian diet because of the intense energy demands that growing and having large brains involves. Brains are the most energy-demanding organs in our bodies. For example, neural tissue costs 16 times more in terms of energy and nutrients required for growth compared to muscle tissues. Sure, many would argue that we can sustain adequate levels of energy and nutrients to support optimal brain growth on a vegetarian diet, and that is true today. However, among the various options known or available to Homo habilis in the savanna plains of Africa 2 million years ago, a vegetarian diet for these early humans would have meant a very difficult life, and certainly not one that could trigger the most impressive evolutionary event in the history of primates, that of becoming the world's smartest and most successful animal. For typical adults, the brain uses 25% of the body's total energy budget while at rest. Up to 50% of our fuel goes to the brain when it's working hard on thinking or doing something. For human babies, that demand is even higher and can take up to 80% of the energy budget as they start to grow their brains in their first years of life. By adding regular meat consumption to their diet, early humans benefited from a steady stream of calories, rich in protein and fatty acids, as well as important micronutrients that support brain growth, such as iron and zinc. Furthermore, their long-distance scavenging bouts would eventually evolve into cooperative hunting of live prey. That, in turn, would trigger another factor in the evolution of our brains: social cohesion and the ability to adapt to the complexities of cooperation as part of a group. The drive to anticipate the behavior of their prey would lead to intellectual innovations in early human hunting behavior, allowing them to outsmart the animals that they would intend to ambush. Bringing the meat back to a campsite for group consumption with the other members of their extended family would add to the social dynamics of cooperation. Importantly, the ability to communicate with each other would be key to their success. These primitive examples of organized hunting and sharing were likely precursors for the complex form of communication that would come down the road in the future, that of speech. This new active lifestyle required ingenuity, memory, and understanding of complex dynamics in real time. As noted, it also necessitated the development of socially cooperative groups that would come to depend on one another and to share their information and thoughts through language. Those key factors may well have been the catalyst for the evolution of increased brain growth in these early humans. And that growth would have been dependent on the energy and nutrients that could only come from regular consumption of meat. Over the course of the next million years, early humans would transition towards more modern forms, including Homo erectus, named for their fully upright bodies that were well adapted for walking and running. Other more recent species of humans would experience massive increases in brain size as well. This latter period of brain growth would bring the human brain to its current volume of around 1,400 cubic centimeters, or more than 3 times the size of our recent ancestors, the Australopithecines. So far, we've been talking about the human brain simply in terms of its increase in volume over evolutionary time. But it's important to note that this does not simply mean that the relative parts of the brain have become bigger over time, or that new structures have been laid down on top of old ones, although both of these are in fact true. What is more astonishing about the size and power of the human brain is how it has undergone major transformations in the allocations of roles for each of its parts, as well as how integrated, connected, and self-aware these parts are to one another, compared to other mammals, or even our great ape cousins.
The cerebrum is the top part of the brain, which is largest among mammals compared to other animals. And the outer portion of this brain region is known as the cerebral cortex, which is best developed among humans compared to all other animals. With its many folds and creases, curves and grooves, it allows for a much greater surface area, just like this walnut.
This is what gives human brains that sinuous, swirly look of squirming fat worms all over its surface, whereas other mammals have mostly smooth brain surfaces. All of those folds and grooves are what are behind our mastery of our bodies, minds, and situations, giving humans direct control over these, unlike most other animals that are reacting to life with automated movements, instinctive responses, and pre-programmed behaviors. Furthermore, along the surface of the cerebral cortex, the human brain has reallocated portions of its functions to primary senses such as taste, smell, touch, vision, and hearing, where initial processing of these sensory inputs and the initiation of response movements occur. In other, neighboring regions of the cortex, we now find the human brain to have developed what are known as association areas. These allow the processing of information from primary sensory regions, allowing us to integrate and assess this information cognitively and to use it to make decisions. Expansion of the temporal lobe may have been important in human evolution due to its role in visuospatial and sensory integration, social communication, control of finger movements, and other motor control that would have been useful for specialized tool use. Parts of the brain that have become more important in humans include the hippocampus and the amygdala, which are both parts of the limbic system right under the front part of the temporal lobe. They have important connections to the forebrain and the prefrontal cortex, where decisions are made upon its received information. The limbic system is known as the emotional brain because it supports important social functions like emotions, long-term memory, behaviors, and olfaction, or the sense of smell. In particular, the hippocampus is directly involved in memory storage and retrieval, spatial awareness, and autobiographical memories of one's own life. These features would be extremely important for an animal that travels over great distances with others to find and hunt large animals. But having a good memory would also be quite useful for keeping track and moderating the relationships that they have with their fellow humans in such highly social contexts as these. Another component of the human brain that is said to have become increasingly important to our social dynamics over evolutionary time is the amygdala. This small almond-shaped cluster of neurons is the center of the emotional brain or limbic system. At one time, it would have played a crucial role for our ancestors as a fear signaling region of the brain, identifying danger and initiating fight or flight responses. But later, the amygdala would take on a secondary and transformative role in the brains of humans, that of processing the emotional content of faces of people and assessing the complex social information being expressed. Also, due to its close association with the hippocampus, a human's amygdala is capable of interpreting the socio-emotional states of those around them with the personal, autobiographical memories of the individual. This allows us to develop strong and lasting relationship bonds with others in our community. A fundamental feature of social living that has become a trademark of modern humans and one that has contributed so much to our success as a species. We are profoundly social animals who depend on one another, and our interconnected lives bring mutual benefits to those of us who can and do cooperate with one another. The thing about the human limbic system is that not only have certain parts of it taken on new roles in emotional and memory-based processing, but also that they have developed tight links through neuronal wiring with portions of the frontal lobe of the brain, most notably the prefrontal cortex. This newest and most human part of the brain is known for being the CEO or chief decision maker in our cortex. The prefrontal cortex, or PFC, is where all the sensory information from all parts of our brain is encoded with memory-based histories and contexts, which allows modern humans to make rational decisions and to properly regulate our emotional self-control. It is continuously monitoring our environments to make evidence-based decisions and to allow us to adapt to changing scenarios and contexts that are always fluid and dynamic among communities of humans that are existing and engaging with one another. Of the major regions in the human brain, it may be said that the frontal lobe, which houses our prefrontal cortex decision maker, language processing areas, as well as other important regions like those involved in conscious motor control of our hands and bodies, might be the most important part of our brains, the part that truly makes us human. Sitting right up at the front of the brain, the frontal lobe is what gives us our tall and straight foreheads and differentiates our head and skull shapes from our great ape cousins, who all have proportionally less frontal lobe volume in their brains and have thus all retained a flattened and sloping forehead without that bulge of a frontal lobe from within. This executive cognition function from our frontal lobes is also what has allowed humans to undertake planning and foresight in our lives, to be able to reason in abstract terms, to think and speak in the form of languages, as well as to regulate all of the complex emotional management along the way. It is the reason why we're able to process the perception of causality, of the what-if scenario, which is a bedrock of problem-solving and true intelligence. An emergent consequence of these features of our brain's functions is the theory of mind, or rather, our ability to believe, suppose, imagine, desire, understand, and think about ourselves and the rest of the world with intention.
By the time the anatomically modern humans, or our current species of Homo sapiens, came about approximately 200,000 years ago, we were already equipped with the newest and most powerful brain on Earth. One that's capable of maintaining strong emotional bonds with fellow humans, sharing thoughts and ideas through language, building sophisticated tools that allow us a mastery over our environment, and one with a propensity for creative and expressive actions through music, art, and stories. Just as importantly, it also gave us empathy for our brothers and sisters of the human race. And it would allow us to become less reliant on these, delicious though they are, and to seek out other food sources that would contribute to the evolution of those big, complex brains. Here you go, Frida. Who's a good doggy?